Aisha was the kind of girl who never believed she was special. She walked quietly through life, choosing not to draw attention to herself. Every morning she would get ready for work in the same routine way, comb her hair neatly, wear her plain clothes, and step out of her small apartment with a bag clutched close to her side. She was never late, never early, always blending into the background. Her co-workers often joked that she was like a shadow, always present but never noticed. And that was exactly how she liked it. Or at least, that was what she had convinced herself to believe. One ordinary afternoon, Aisha finished her shift at the office and hurried toward the bus stop. It was her usual routine: reach the stop, stand in her usual spot, wait for the same bus, and get home. But that day, something felt different. When she arrived, she noticed a man already standing there. At first, she didn't pay much attention, but after a few minutes she felt something unusual, a pair of eyes on her. She quickly glanced up and saw him looking at her, not in a rude or harsh way, but with a calmness that unsettled her heart. His expression wasn't mocking or cold. It was gentle, almost as if he was trying to understand her without saying a single word. Aisha immediately looked away, her cheeks warming with discomfort. No one ever looked at her like that. She was used to being invisible, used to people passing her by as if she didn't exist. Why was this man staring? She shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check her phone, pretending she had something important to do. But every few seconds she could feel his gaze again. "Stop looking at me like I matter," she whispered under her breath, so quietly that only she could hear it. The words slipped out before she could stop them. She felt her throat tighten. She wasn't angry, but she was confused by why anyone would notice her at all. When she finally dared to glance up again, the man gave her a small smile. It wasn't wide or overconfident. It was the kind of smile that carried warmth, the kind that said, "I see you." But Aisha didn't want to be seen. Not now, not ever. She quickly turned her face away and fixed her eyes on the arriving bus. As soon as the doors opened, she stepped in without another look, choosing the seat farthest from the crowd. But, deep down, the image of that smile refused to leave her mind. The next day, Aisha told herself it had just been a coincidence. He was probably just another commuter, just someone she would never see again. She comforted herself with that thought as she walked toward the bus stop. But when she reached, her heart skipped a beat. He was there again, standing in the same place, waiting for the same bus. She froze for a second, her steps slowing down. For a brief moment, she thought of turning around and taking another route home. But that would look strange, she told herself. She couldn't act like a scared child. So, she stood at a safe distance, keeping her eyes firmly fixed on the ground. But she could sense it again, that feeling of being noticed. She risked a quick glance, and there it was, the same gentle gaze. This time he didn't smile right away. Instead, he nodded politely, like two strangers acknowledging each other's presence. It was nothing dramatic, yet it felt heavy to Aisha. She didn't know how to react. She quickly looked away again, her heartbeat louder than the traffic around her. Why? Why did he have to notice her? On the bus ride home, her thoughts refused to settle. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, wondering if she had imagined it. Maybe he wasn't looking at her at all. Maybe he was just lost in thought. But deep inside, she knew she hadn't imagined it. That look was real, and it carried something she had long forgotten: attention. For the rest of the week, their paths kept crossing. Every evening he was there, always calm, always polite. He never forced a conversation, never made her feel threatened. But his presence was undeniable. And Aisha didn't know what to do with it. She started to dread the bus stop, yet at the same time, she found herself hurrying there, curious to see if he would show up. The contradiction confused her. One evening, as she walked toward the stop, she caught herself adjusting her scarf neatly, checking her reflection in a nearby shop's glass window. She froze, shocked at her own behavior. Why was she doing this? She had never cared how she looked before. She had never wanted anyone to notice her. And yet here she was, preparing herself for the possibility of being seen. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind wandered back to his eyes. There had been no judgment in them, no pity, no mocking laughter, only a quiet acknowledgement. It was strange, almost frightening. Aisha wasn't used to that kind of attention. She wasn't used to mattering. She thought of her childhood, the days when she used to raise her hand in class hoping someone would call on her, only to be ignored. She remembered birthdays that passed by like any other day, with no one remembering, no one caring. Slowly, she had built a shield around herself, convincing herself that invisibility was safer than being seen and then forgotten. And yet now, at a bus stop on ordinary evenings, one stranger was breaking through that shield without even trying. She hated it. She feared it. But deep down, a small part of her longed for it. The next time she saw him, she almost whispered those words again. "Stop looking at me like I matter." But she held them back, swallowing them down as the bus arrived. She didn't understand why it hurt and healed at the same time. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Over the next few days, Aisha noticed something she could not ignore anymore. Every time she went to the bus stop, Imran was there. That was his name. She had overheard someone greeting him once. He stood calmly, never rushing, never making a scene. Sometimes he would simply check his watch, sometimes glance at the road, and sometimes without fail look at her with that same gentle expression. It was not the kind of stare that made her uncomfortable in a bad way, but it was still difficult for her to accept. Aisha was used to being the person no one cared about. At her office, people rarely remembered her name. When she entered the break room, conversations continued without a pause, as if her presence meant nothing. And truthfully, she preferred it that way. To her, attention often meant trouble, teasing, questions she didn't want to answer, or pity she didn't need. But Imran's way of noticing her felt different. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't loud, it wasn't mocking. It was simply there, steady like a quiet reminder that she existed. At first, she convinced herself it was just a coincidence. He probably worked nearby, probably took the same bus because it was convenient. There was no reason to read more into it. But then small things began to happen. One evening, the bus was more crowded than usual. Aisha stood, clutching the metal bar, trying to balance herself as the vehicle jerked forward. Out of nowhere, Imran stood and offered her his seat. She hesitated, shaking her head, not wanting to draw attention. But he gently insisted, stepping aside without saying much, and she finally sat down. The kindness felt strange, like a spotlight she hadn't asked for. Another day, she struggled with the heavy door of the bus stop shelter as the wind pushed it against her. Imran quietly stepped forward, holding it open until she had passed through. He didn't say anything grand or dramatic, just a polite nod. But for Aisha, even these small gestures felt overwhelming. Her colleagues noticed too. One afternoon, while they all waited near the office gate, one of them nudged her with a playful grin. "Looks like you've got a secret admirer," they teased, pointing toward Imran, who was standing a little distance away. Aisha's face burned with embarrassment. She immediately shook her head, denying it, pretending she had no idea what they were talking about. But deep inside, her heart was beating faster than she wanted to admit. That evening, she sat on the bus with her thoughts in turmoil. Why was he doing this? Why did he treat her with such quiet respect when he didn't even know her? People rarely went out of their way for her, yet here was someone who didn't seem to expect anything in return. It frightened her because kindness in her world often came with strings attached. When she reached home, she sat by the window of her small apartment, thinking about him. His face was calm, his manner never forceful. If she were honest with herself, she didn't feel unsafe around him. But that was the very thing that scared her most. She wasn't used to safe. She wasn't used to kindness without conditions. Her life had taught her to doubt every gentle word and every kind gesture, because they usually ended with disappointment. The next day, she decided she would ignore him completely. She reached the bus stop and stood as far away as possible, her eyes fixed firmly on the road. But even then, she could feel his presence nearby. He didn't try to speak to her, didn't invade her space. Still, when the bus came and the crowd rushed forward, she noticed him again, this time slowing down so she could get on first. She wanted to scream, wanted to tell him to stop making her feel important. Yet when she looked back briefly, he simply smiled faintly and turned away. Aisha's mind was restless. That night, lying in bed, she thought about the way people had treated her all her life. Most were indifferent, some unkind, but very few had ever shown her simple respect. And now, with every little act of politeness, Imran was making her question the wall she had built around herself. The following week, something small yet unforgettable happened. It was raining heavily, and Aisha arrived at the stop, drenched because her umbrella had broken in the wind. She tried to shake off the water, embarrassed at her state, when Imran quietly stepped closer. Without saying anything, he tilted his umbrella slightly, enough to cover both of them. Aisha froze. The closeness made her uncomfortable, yet at the same time the gesture warmed her in a way the cold rain could not. She wanted to refuse, wanted to step aside, but the truth was she needed the shelter. For a moment, she thought of saying something rude to push him away. But when she looked up at his face, she saw no expectation, no arrogance, just calm patience. He was simply sharing, nothing more. That made it harder for her. Why was he doing this? Why was he making her feel seen? Her lips trembled as she whispered, so softly he couldn't hear, "Stop looking at me like I matter." The words were for herself more than him. She wanted to remind herself that this was dangerous, that this kind of attention always ended badly. But despite her fear, she stayed under that umbrella until the bus came, and when they both stepped in, she noticed something she hadn't before. The way other passengers greeted him, the way he carried himself with quiet respect. He wasn't someone trying to impress her. He was simply kind by nature. That night, she lay awake longer than usual, thinking about how her routine was changing without her permission. The bus stop had once been just a place she passed through, but now it had become something else, something that made her heart restless. She didn't want this. She didn't ask for this. And yet a small, stubborn part of her wondered, what if just this once it wasn't a trick? What if just this once someone really did see her? Aisha sat by her window late at night, her head resting on her hand, watching the city lights blink in the distance. She wondered why her heart felt so heavy. Every time Imran showed her a small act of kindness, she felt both grateful and uneasy. Most people would smile back, say thank you, maybe even enjoy it. But for her it was complicated. It was not that she disliked him. She didn't. In fact, there was something calming about his presence. The problem was not him. The problem was her. Her past still lived inside her like an old wound that never healed. She thought back to her childhood. Her parents were strict people, never cruel in an obvious way, but never gentle either. Whenever she tried to share her feelings, they brushed her aside. If she cried, they told her to stop making a scene. If she laughed too loudly, they asked her to be quiet. Slowly, she learned that her emotions didn't matter to anyone. At school, she was the quiet one at the back of the class. When teachers asked questions, she often knew the answers but hesitated to raise her hand. On the rare days she did, no one called on her and she would lower it again, feeling invisible. Birthdays were the hardest. While other children had parties and gifts, her birthdays passed with little more than a simple meal and silence. No one ever made her feel special, not even for a day. Those years shaped her belief that she wasn't important. By the time she grew up, she had built a wall around herself. It was easier not to expect anything from people. It was easier to be unnoticed than to risk being seen and then ignored. That was why Imran's gaze felt so dangerous. It wasn't just a look. It was like a hand trying to pull her out of the shadows she had lived in for so long. And she didn't know how to handle that. One evening, as she waited at the bus stop, her thoughts wandered. Imran was there as usual, standing a short distance away. He gave her a polite nod when their eyes met, but nothing more. It should have been harmless, but her chest tightened anyway. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Did he see someone ordinary? Someone quiet? Or did he see more? something she had long forgotten about herself. Her colleagues at work had started whispering whenever they noticed him. "He's always around when she's around," one of them giggled. "Maybe he likes her." The teasing made Aisha shrink further into herself. She didn't want anyone to notice, didn't want her private struggle to become office gossip. When they laughed, she forced a smile, pretending not to care. But later, when she was alone, her heart felt heavy. Why would someone like him notice someone like her? Imran carried himself with quiet confidence. He seemed comfortable in his own skin, the kind of person people respected without him trying. She, on the other hand, was just Aisha. Ordinary, unremarkable, always blending into the background. It made no sense. And because it made no sense, she was convinced it would end in disappointment. She remembered times when she had let her guard down in the past. Once, she had trusted a college friend who promised to always stay by her side. But soon that friend found better company and left her behind without explanation. Another time, she had opened up to a relative about her struggles, only to be told she was too sensitive and should stop imagining problems. Every time she trusted, it ended with her feeling foolish. That was why she learned to stay silent, to keep everything inside. So now, when Imran looked at her with eyes that seemed honest and gentle, she didn't know how to believe it. She told herself over and over again that it was only temporary. One day he would stop noticing her. One day he would walk past her without a glance and she would be forgotten once more. That was how life always worked for her. Yet no matter how much she tried to push the thought away, she could not deny the small flutter in her chest whenever he was around. It scared her more than anything. She didn't want to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to pain. One rainy evening when the bus was late, she found herself standing closer to him than usual. The shelter was crowded, and there was little space. For a few minutes, silence surrounded them except for the sound of rain hitting the roof. Aisha kept her eyes on the ground, her hands twisting together nervously. She could feel his presence beside her, steady and calm. Suddenly, she felt a wave of anger, not at him, but at herself. Why was she so afraid of someone being kind? Why did she feel the urge to push him away when all he had done was offer her simple respect? She wanted to scream, to tell him to stop looking at her like she mattered. Because if he didn't stop, she feared she might start believing it. That night, lying in bed, she thought about the walls she had built. They had protected her for so long, but they had also trapped her. She lived a life of safety, but it was also a life of emptiness. No deep friendships, no close bonds, just routines and silence. And now here was someone who wasn't trying to break her walls, but somehow was gently reaching over them. Aisha turned on her side, hugging her pillow tightly. She whispered to herself, "He doesn't mean it. He'll stop one day. Don't let it get to you." But deep down, a softer voice inside her asked, "And what if he doesn't? What if this time is different?" The thought both terrified and comforted her, and so as days passed, her heart remained in conflict. She walked the same path, stood at the same stop, and boarded the same bus. Yet everything felt different now. The routine she once used to hide behind was slowly changing, and she wasn't sure whether to run from it or let it happen. Aisha's world had begun to feel smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller because her life revolved around her routines, her small apartment, her work, and now the bus stop where she encountered Imran. Larger because every small interaction with him seemed to expand her heart in ways she did not understand. It was confusing, almost frightening, yet strangely comforting. One rainy evening, the wind tore her umbrella apart, leaving her completely soaked as she hurried to the bus stop. She shivered, feeling miserable, wishing she had stayed a few minutes longer at the office to avoid the storm. Then she noticed Imran standing nearby, holding his own umbrella calmly against the rain. Without a word, he tilted it slightly so that it covered her as well. Aisha froze. The closeness made her heart race, and for the first time, she felt the warmth of someone truly looking out for her. Her first instinct was to step aside, to refuse. She wanted to keep the wall she had built firmly in place. But the rain was harsh. Her clothes clung to her, and she was too cold to argue. Slowly, she moved under the shared shelter of the umbrella. He didn't say a word, didn't reach for her hand or touch her in any way. He simply shared his space, allowing her to stay dry while the rain poured around them. The bus arrived a few minutes later, and she got on first, trying to avoid looking at him. But the quiet in her chest remained, an echo of something she had never felt before. She didn't know what it was: trust, care, or simply the strange recognition that someone noticed her in a way that did not come with judgment. That night, back in her apartment, she replayed the scene over and over. She wondered why she felt so nervous, why her chest ached, and why tears threatened to come even though she had not wanted anyone to care. She whispered to herself, "Stop looking at me like I matter. Please. I can't handle it." The words were barely audible, yet they carried a lifetime of fear and longing. Over the next few days, Aisha's behavior became more conflicted. She wanted to avoid Imran entirely, to pretend she had never seen him, yet at the same time she felt drawn to the moments when he was there. Every small gesture, holding a door, smiling politely, or just nodding, felt like both a gift and a challenge. She began questioning herself. Why was she so afraid of someone being kind? Why did a simple smile make her feel exposed? She realized slowly that her fear was not of Imran. It was of letting herself believe she was worthy of care. Her entire life had been shaped by neglect, by indifference, by people who never made her feel important. And now, here was someone treating her with a sincerity she had never experienced. That sincerity was unfamiliar, uncomfortable, yet almost irresistible. One evening, as they both waited under the bus shelter in silence, Aisha finally broke. Her voice trembled as she said, "Stop looking at me like I matter. Please, I can't handle it." Tears ran down her cheeks. She didn't understand why she was crying or why her heart felt so heavy. She had never been seen in this way before, and it both terrified and comforted her. Imran didn't respond with words. He didn't argue, didn't leave, didn't make her feel guilty. Instead, he simply stood quietly beside her, holding the umbrella steady, sharing the small space without expectation. When the bus finally arrived, he stayed close, letting her board first. The moment was simple, almost mundane, but to Aisha, it felt like a turning point. That night she lay in bed thinking about the small acts of kindness that had accumulated over the weeks. For the first time in years, she began to understand that her fear of being noticed was more about her past than about him. She had built walls to protect herself from disappointment, but now those walls were being gently tested. And though it scared her, a small part of her wanted to let someone in, even just a little. Days passed, and Aisha found herself thinking more about Imran than she wanted. She began to notice his actions in detail. The way he treated strangers politely, the calmness in his voice, the quiet patience he showed. It was nothing dramatic, yet everything about him made her heart both anxious and hopeful. She realized that her initial fear was fading slowly, replaced by something unfamiliar: trust. Finally, one day she decided to take a small step. She approached him at the bus stop, hesitant, hands fidgeting, heart racing. I want to apologize," she said softly, "for snapping at you, for everything." Her voice was fragile, yet steady. Imran smiled gently. "There's nothing to apologize for," he said. "I never looked at you out of pity. I just respect you. That's all." Aisha blinked, surprised. Respect? Just respect? No expectations? No strings attached? She felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. It was strange, almost foreign, but it was real. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that someone could see her without wanting anything in return. From that moment, Aisha began to change. She still carried the scars of her past, but she took small steps toward accepting kindness and trust. She noticed the little joys around her, the sunlight on her balcony, the laughter of children in the street, and even the routine bus ride that no longer felt so lonely. She began to understand that being seen was not dangerous. It could be healing. Her interactions with Imran continued, but now they were different. She no longer felt the need to push him away or demand that he stop noticing her. Instead, she allowed herself to exist in his calm presence, learning slowly how to accept attention, respect, and care without fear. She realized that healing was not instant. It was gradual, like the slow blooming of a flower after a long winter. Every smile, every small gesture, every quiet acknowledgement of her presence became a step forward in a journey she had never thought possible. And in that quiet, steady way, Aisha learned an important truth. Sometimes people matter simply because someone chooses to see them, not because they have done anything extraordinary, not because they are perfect, but simply because they exist. For the first time, she didn't need to beg anyone to stop noticing her. Instead, she allowed herself to matter, slowly, quietly, gently, in the company of someone who had never stopped believing she did.